Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Studying Law Around the World. Today, we have the opportunity to be hosting here Claudio Martellacci. Claudio, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to meet with a fellow Claudio. They only make good ones with that name.
That's right. Absolutely have to agree with you on that one. And a very cool thing is that in the last, I think maybe 20, 30 episodes, I basically spoke with lawyers only in the podcast. And I'm so glad to get the chance to speak with you today. And to start off our conversation today, could you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, like I heard about you on sort of LinkedIn and through a couple of colleagues that I think you've interviewed already. And I noticed that you're kind of working your way through the law space. I thought it might be cool to speak to someone like me who's sort of law adjacent, right? So I am a chartered accountant. I'm a chartered business valuator. I did 9 years in really personal corporate tax and audit, most recently at KPMG. And then I switched over really into valuations and litigation support. And so I do a ton of litigation related work. My practice in particular is probably 60% litigation support based. And we cover, matrimonials, shareholder disputes, commercial litigation, damages quantification, a little bit of personal injury, and then estate litigation as well. Right. And so, we wear a lot of different hats and we do a lot of work in that space. And so I thought it might be cool for you to see, what an expert witness is sort of like. And that's what we do typically on those cases.
Well, that sounds amazing. And if I were to ask you to, kind of go back to the beginning, what first, sparkled that interest for you in accounting, in business valuation? Did you just grow up thinking you just wanted to be a CPA so bad?
Oh no, 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 no. Far from it. So I was a bit of a, you know, how to put it. I wasn't the most responsible high schooler, I would say. My marks weren't the greatest, in the first couple of years anyway. And I sort of found my stride in grade 11, and I found it honestly in accounting class. I took to it naturally. For whatever reason, I liked it. I was very good. Marks were very high. And I thought, this is kind of cool. So I took it again in grade 12. And again, I did enjoy it. And, I found it a bit of a niche for me. You have to be a certain level of nerd to really like accounting. And I consider myself that level of nerd for sure. And so, I did well. And I thought, wow, let me look into this as a potential career path. And I realized that all the doors had remained open. And one of the reasons why I found it so valuable is because I actually didn't know what I wanted to do with my life for the longest time. It probably took me longer than most, and I'll get to that a little bit later, but probably until I was in my early 30s where I figured out, hey, this is what I really want to do, right? And it was really the flexibility that the CPA designation, the accounting experience and the expertise provides you, because you can really get into any field with sort of that at the backdrop, right? And that was really it. I just wanted to give myself as much flexibility, keep as many doors and windows open as possible because, it's a big wide world of life and career out there. And I didn't know what I wanted to do for the longest time. So that's what kind of sparked it.
That sounds great. And with your career, kind of looking over, your bio online, your LinkedIn, and all of that, I saw you have a background in multiple areas. You just mentioned about the flexibility that the designation gives you, but included audits, tax compliance, financial reporting. Were there any key moments that really shaped that career path, either confirming that you really wanted to do that, or things that oh, I really don't like doing that, I'm gonna do something else?
Yeah, that's a great question. Key moment when I left. So I was working at a firm called College Barrow Vaughan, which was in Vaughan and later became Baker Tilly Vaughan and got bought by KPMG, where I eventually worked after. But I was there for about 2.5 years and I learned a lot, the personal corporate tax and audit. I felt like I needed to kind of grow. And I thought that the next step would be to kind of work for, in the industry space, not in public accounting anymore, right? I worked for like one specific company. And so I left and I got a job at a company as an assistant controller and I hated it. And no offense to the company or anything. It just wasn't, that role wasn't for me. I realized that a lot of the things that I thought stressed me out about public accounting, I really like a lot. I like jumping around from project to project and working on different companies' files, every 2 weeks and really bouncing around a lot. The pace and the variety was what made it so attractive to me and what I liked so much. And so I didn't really realize that until I left. Now, what the clarity was when I left and then ultimately came back to work for KPMG was that I needed something a little bit more than just audit. and personal corporate tax. I'm like, what will that something more be? So I thought, what can I stack onto my CPA designation that sort of builds it? And I thought of the CBV, the CFA, and the MBA. And I thought, MBA, too similar and probably not as good overall compared to the CPA. So that's out. And the CFA, I thought, interesting, but would probably cannibalize a lot of my accounting experience and background. And so that didn't really work either. And then I looked up at the CBD, and I had done one project because my old boss was a CBD. We did one valuation together. And it was a litigation based. And I thought it was so cool. And so I dug more into it. And I thought, wow, this is really, really cool. I didn't even know this existed, that accountants could do this. And I enrolled in the program even before I started at KPMG. And I told them, I'll give you 3 busy seasons here in audit, to be a good soldier, but I want to eventually like get into the valuations department and really go full on with this. Like I want to be a valuator, right? And that was probably it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but that was the key moment, was kind of leaving public accounting and then coming back to it and realizing, I want to take this other step and move forward that way.
Awesome. So just to clarify for the audience, the CBV is a Chartered Business Valuator. And just for context, do you need to be already a CPA in order to do that, or how does that work?
You do not actually. No, you can go directly into the CBV stream. There's a lot of, again, congruency between the CPA and the CBV. You need a lot of personal tax knowledge. Like it helps. Not that you need it, but it is definitely helpful. A lot of accounting knowledge, obviously, when you're a CBV, the main document you're typically looking at are financial statements and trial balances, right? So, if you're accountant background, um, obviously that stuff is a little bit more familiar to you than if you are not. But it's not, I would not say it's a requirement in any respect, right? They sort of build upon each other. Whichever one you have or do first, the other one would still build upon, if you were to do it second. And you really don't need to do the CPA at all, like if you want to be a CPD. But I wouldn't say like it would definitely sharpen your skills if you're both. Like there's no question. So yeah, that's what it is.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for clarifying on that. And the more we look into it, it seems like accounting and the law overlap more and more. So I'd love to hear more about the work you do, the business valuation, the legal matters. I was just thinking as I prepared for this, right? Like I'm guessing for the solo lawyers, they have to do a lot of the things end up being on their own, right? Like from the accounting for the firm itself all the way to each of the cases they work on. But I'd love to hear a little more about your role on that.
Yeah. So that's funny you mentioned that. So obviously we're a full service accounting firm. We do a number of, typical sort of nuts and bolts accounting services for lawyers and professionals across the board, whether they be doctors, dentists, vets, lawyers, all the above. But my department specifically is valuations and litigation support, which is probably a bit of a misnomer because we really are like quantification. Really, anytime you need a number, we're sort of, the team to call, so to speak. And often in litigation matters, the primary concerns are financial. And when they're financial, that's where we really, you know, can help out to flesh out sort of the answers, or at least provide some sort of path towards resolution. So, for example, we do a lot of matrimonial work, and in the matrimonial space, we'll do income calculations for support purposes, and we'll do valuations of businesses and even preparation or assistance with preparing the Form 13.1 financial statements. So that's your sort of personal financial statement when you are in a divorce matter, and that combines to something called the net family property statement, which is how you determine the division of assets and the ultimate equalization between the two parties when they split, right? So we are very well adept and very, enthusiastic about putting that stuff together. And again, in order to bring resolution, right? So we like to provide some clear answers and some clear paths forward. Things like divorce are very sad, very difficult parts of people's lives. So from my perspective, it's always been about helping someone get through something very difficult in the way that I can. So I appreciate that we're not saving people's lives on the operating table here. We're not the doctors of the world really making the most impact. But in our own little way, this is where we contribute to making people's lives better, right? That's sort of what gives the meaning to it for me. From that, that's matrimonials, right? And then you've got like estate litigation where, beneficiaries might be fighting over, a certain estate's assets, maybe all the assets, maybe some of them and how they were divided. Estates I always refer to as sort of like a choose your own adventure. You never really know what you're going to be asked to do at the beginning with an estate matter to help resolve it. And a lot of times we work with counsel really for both sides to figure out like what is the best way to do that. And we also work with our tax consulting department, which is sort of in lockstep with ours, to figure out a way that we can kind of value the assets or provide a quantification of whatever they need us to, and then to distribute in a way that's very tax efficient. And the example I always give is, I can say this stuff is worth $5 million. And then our tax department's job is to kind of make it feel like $5.5 million for the beneficiaries, right? By distributing things in a very tax efficient manner, right? And that's the value we try to provide to our clients. And really one of the main things about our firm that's made us very attractive. We're sort of a one-stop shop for this kind of stuff, right? And not many firms are, frankly. We've grown a lot. We're a 100-person firm now. We were probably around 18 about 4.5 years ago when I joined. And yeah, it's just, we've been off to the races since then. It's been a lot of growth, very busy, but it's been amazing and made a lot of impact, I think, in the market and on people's lives.
And that sounds so great, and I guess it ties a lot to the personal story that you had on figuring out what you like, and then once you find that very very useful of a profession for sure, and a designation that makes sense for you. Taking all of that into consideration, thinking about young lawyers like law students right now who are also trying to navigate different spaces and maybe even consider a non-linear career paths for law.
Yeah, you mean it's like a lawyer trying to get into that kind of thing, or a lawyer engaging with or networking with those type of people so that they have sort of that at their disposal if the case needs it.
At first, not thinking about, young lawyers who are like, I don't want to do the lawyer thing. The law degree is very useful. I love it, but I don't think I want to be a lawyer. And then maybe going into that. And you know what? Why don't we talk about both of the options?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I mean, that's very existential for sure. Like if you're a lawyer and you want to get into the math side of things, I always find, for whatever reason, and my wife is a lawyer as well. And it's like, I'm allowed to say this. The lawyers and math don't always, I feel like, line up very well together. And that's frankly why I'm employed, I think, and why my designation and service package exists and is attractive in the first place, I think. The lawyers try to veer more into sort of the theology and the real nitty gritty arguments behind positions, right? Whether it be two or more on a given matter, right? And sometimes they need not so worried about the number; they're worried about their their own position and stance, right? Based on a certain set of case facts. And lawyers, I always feel like are more like puzzle oriented that way, right? Whereas people like us, the number of guys and gals are a little bit more structured in that regard, where we say like, we really want to break everything down into the dollars and cents. Sometimes to our detriment. Like I have a joke actually that I always say, in my role, I'm sort of 60% accountant, 20% lawyer, and 20% therapist because, you know, with the states and matrimonials, the reality is they're very emotional, right? And lawyers will definitely know this, obviously. Like it's such emotional work. You have such, personal conversations with really everyone involved because you're digging into their life, right? Like, oh, how did you split, annual expenses with your husband or wife, right? Who paid for what? Did they pay you a salary out of their business, right? Like there's a lot, and it gets, even more in depth from there and stuff that I probably can't share on the call. But, when you get so ingrained with it, it's just, you have to have sort of a different perspective. And while the two things are very similar, being that, I'm a litigation accountant, 60% of the time, uh, they're just very different. But yeah, for I guess a lawyer that wanted to try their hand at going to the accounting route, be my guest. Feel free to reach out. But you are probably already picked the right path.
Amazing. Going on the other route we just talked about, how do you, build these relationships with expert witnesses and all of that? I know that there is some sort of there must be some sort of like a non that close of a relationship because
That's
cases,
interesting, right?
I'd love to hear about, the networking and all of that.
Yeah, it's professional services, right? So the thing is, you can market it like crazy, and you can have the greatest website and LinkedIn profile, yada yada yada. And the reality is, word of mouth is still sort of the number one networking tool and business tool, right? And your delivery is the best marketing that you can do. When you do well on your files, people say, yeah, I worked, in my case, I worked with this guy, Claudio, and he did a really good job on this file. And for witness, to you, that like that kind of stuff is important. That's really it. Like I would reach out to basically others in your space, right? And say, hey, have you worked with any good valuators? Do you know of any that are recommended? Yada yada. And then you could do the Google search thing as well. Like that, it's not like that won't. You could read up on my LinkedIn profile and a host of others, right? And websites and things like that to do your research. I encourage you to do it if you're a lawyer in sort of the litigation space, or even not, even solicitor space, where you have to quantify things sometimes, and it may be a little bit over your head. Getting the accountants involved earlier is generally better. It's less costly. You won't spin your wheels trying to figure out what to do. Typically, they'll have the answers if you can kind of lay out the path, and it's just more efficient. It's always better, to provide that kind of full package service for your clients. It won't always be apparent on the first case or the second case, but ultimately, if you kind of know what to do in a given situation, even though it's not your specific expertise, and knowing what to do might just be simply, oh, I should call that evaluator again, right? That might be enough to get the job done and do good work for your client, right? And that, at the end of the day, is what you're trying to do as a professional, trying to provide, good quality service, and that will build your own sort of brand and your business and your career from there, right? It's easier than it really sounds, I guess. You just got to do it. It's a contact sport.
No, that's awesome, and I think it aligns a lot with the whole story you've been telling us about how you got to where you are today, and maybe even is that your personal belief? If you were, to tell yourself from, 10 years ago, just try it out, see if you like it. Is that what you'd recommend?
Yeah, 100%. Like you just got to do it. Um, it's not. It's a bit related to sort of a imposter syndrome where people always feel like they shouldn't be in the role they're in, or they don't deserve it. If you challenge yourself from life, you always kind of feel like that to some degree, right? You almost should feel like that, right? Because that's how you're growing. If you're sort of in uncharted waters, a bit, like you're expanding your horizons, you're getting smarter. You don't maybe feel it yet, or you're not so confident, right? And that's not to say like it's not really fake it till you make it. No, if you're a diligent professional, you do the work to better understand something. Everything is a puzzle. Every case we get, for example, there's parts of it that are a little bit over our head on day one, and then we wrap our heads around when we think about it. And we do our research, we look at case law, and we look at other things we've done in the past, and we come up with a reasonable answer that's well thought out and supported, right? You don't got to get there. It's not like when you write the exams and you have 4 hours to come up with answers to three cases, and you get 60 minutes each or whatever, or what have you, right? This is a situation where you usually have some time. You can do some research. You got to apply it, right, and apply your knowledge. If you're doing that, like you're a good professional, right? That's really the mark of a good professional. You should be doing the research. You're doing your diligence on your files, right? You're not always going to have the answer right away. No one's got encyclopedic knowledge like that. If you think you've sort of met partners in your life that do, the reality is they attain that over like 20, 30, 40 years of experience, right? They made many, many mistakes in their 20s and 30s, just like, you and I will, right? And, that's par for the course, right? Sometimes that's lost on sort of the younger professionals. Like, wow, how did my partner or my group get so smart? Well, you've been doing this for 3 years and they've been doing it for 30. That's really the difference, right? You'll see 27 years from now.
That's right. No, I'm a firm believer that you have to do something repeatedly to get really good at it. We were just talking at work the other day about, how class actions really help out because you just have to do basically the same thing so many times that it's almost hard not to get good at it or not to understand how it all works because at the end of the day, you're just doing the same thing so many times, right?
Absolutely. I could speak from personal experience. Like earlier in my career when I worked, I mentioned Collins Barrel Bond. It was a smaller firm, so the clients were smaller, and you usually worked on like the entire file, like from beginning to end, right? And sometimes at the KPMGs of the world, you don't do that. You work on your specific subset. Like at KPMG, I had audit clients, and I worked on the audit, and I was one of the few that also did a little bit of the the corporate tax, but usually it was just audit, right? At Collins Barrel Lawn, it was always everything. So the audits, the corporate tax returns, the financial statements for the holding companies, the personal tax returns, the whole sort of cycle, right? That kind of comprehensive experience that you get in sort of smaller, mid-sized firms is vital. right? And it's, you could argue that it's more important than something you might get at a bigger firm. That I don't want to knock my career at the KPMG. Was excellent, and I'm very grateful for it as well. But it was just, you kind of figure out what right fit is in your career. And my right fit has always been sort of on the smaller, medium sized clients, and that's why the firm that I'm with is sort of that target, right? You find your niche as you move through your career.
Fantastic. Well, Claudio, thank you so much for taking the time to share these insights with us today. And thank you guys for tuning into today's episode. Sounds good. Thank you so much. We'll see you around.